Welcome, Smriti. Welcome to the CTQ Smartcast.
Thank you, Harish. Happy to be with you again.
Yeah. Smriti will dive in straight away into the topic that we want to talk about. So, in these times of distributed work, has an organization's culture and values become even more relevant than earlier? And how has that changed?
Yeah, so of course, I go back to the basics of culture. And I recall we studied these definitions in terms of what culture is all about. Culture is something that you repeatedly do. But how is it showcased? We used to talk about artifacts, we used to talk about rituals, right? Now, if you think of it in a virtual context, Harish, I think all that's got diminished, right? If I used to go to office, I would see all my values called out. I will see somebody else behaving in a particular way. I will see a rhythm around morning meetings. It used to be what you repeatedly do. What are the rituals that an organization has built? And I think in today's days and time, of course, that all has broadly come down. I don't get to see it as often. I'm invited to meetings. I can only go to meetings by invite, because if I don't have a calendar in my inbox, there's no way I will even know that there's a meeting running. Otherwise, you run into training rooms and you realize, oh, the sales team is meeting. Hi, guys. That entire bit
Right.
has gone away. And therefore, to your point, is culture or being a lot more intentional about the culture. I think it's become important, and equally at sometimes I would say the authenticity goes away. The more intentional you become about something, the less natural it seems, right? So I think it's become really tough in that context. So if you think of most of the values that organizations talk about, we talk about ownership, we talk about team spirit. The words could vary across, or somebody will call it collaboration, somebody will call it team spirit, somebody will call it differently. So, ownership, team spirit, collaboration, performance driven, these are some really common words that you hear in values. Is it easy to display it now? I think no, because collaboration, which was so correlated with being in a room and having a whiteboard and discussing your pain points and telling you how I can further your interest, or you telling me yours and we agreeing on what is the way forward. I think it's become really tough. Team spirit in action becomes really tough. Of course, were always there, will continue to be there, and all the more difficult, I think, for the new hires,
Hmm.
because I've been with the organization for X number of years. I know it. I know what they say, they mean it, because I've seen it in action. But if you think of new hires, I think it's the toughest for them. What they experience in interview, they make some impressions. What they experience in different meetings, they make some impressions. But to be able to relate to it on an ongoing basis and to truly trust, I think, has become more difficult. And therefore, getting more intentional about culture has become important.
So we'll come to what can organizations and people do to address this. But before that, one question, Smriti, is what is the danger of this situation that we are in right now, where we are not able to do this in a very deliberate manner, or if people ignore this, that no, we have a great culture, but in the distributed world, it is not being conveyed in the same way. So what is the danger of that?
So, for me, the most important bit that's gone away personally is the comfort of relationships. I think a lot of times work happens because you trust. Work happens because if Harisha said it 5 days, it will happen in 5 days, right? And those relationships just don't get built overnight, right? You invest in relationships, you give some, you take some. I think that comfort of relationships, because you're not informally connected that easily now, I think that's gone away, which of course impacts your quality of work and your time to deliver. There are a lot of benefits of working remotely, Harish. I don't think we can take that away in the virtual context. But to your point, the most impacted, I think, is relationships.
Hmm.
Our work is not formally driven formally all the time. And we talk about networks of relationships, that sutta relationship or late evening relationship, all that has suddenly gone away. And therefore, is there an evident, what can you evidently see that there's an impact on quality of work or time? I don't think so. You can't, at least so far I haven't, because people, it's kind of taken over by productivity. But that productivity, between you and I, if this law lasts much longer, will start getting impacted. Because if you start thinking, of course, it is not equitable distribution of work. And why do I say that? Because the infrastructure availability to me versus another peer who's living in a joint family, to another peer who's expecting a child, I think that availability is not equitable anymore.
Right.
When we went to office, it was the same AC, the same room, the same organizations talking about open spaces these days. So whether you are here or here in the hierarchy, you all have the same space to sit in. I think it was equitable distribution, and therefore equitable. The outcome expected from everyone was to give your best. I think right now productivity did overtake because your commuting time goes away. There's that. But now there is mental fatigue coming in, a lot of mental fatigue coming in. And I think this sooner than later starts impacting. There are people who now start calling us to office now.
Right.
We enjoyed it for a while, and everybody's enjoyed it. I've loved being around my daughter and husband in the same house, which you would generally meet in the evenings, etc. So I think it's a lovely experience, and it has opened up mindsets to a large extent. So now I don't think organizations truly need those policies. You can only work 2 days from home or 2 days in a month from home. Those policy culture may come down because people have been forced to trust their team members that productivity will not suffer, etc. But of course, the long term impact, as I see it, because of inequitable distribution of infrastructure or cultural engagement going missing, I do feel it impacts, let's say, the time to deliver or the quality of delivery. It will start impacting sooner than later.
And Smriti, we often talk about building a culture for future relevance. Do you think having a strong culture around the values that we spoke about, is there a nuance to having a culture which is built towards future relevance, or any culture, a strong culture, a belief will ensure that you are going to endure as an organization and thus be future relevant? Is there a nuance to that?
I think relevance is, of course, important. You know it more than me. With this entire generation of workers changing, we've been talking about millennials and millennials, everybody coming in. We've talking about being more diversity specific. I think those were nuances that got added at every point in time, right? From
Right.
year to year. Now, if you see as of today, future of work is the nuance that gets added, right?
Hmm.
We know this thing, NASA's research, right? It spoke about three things. What is future of work defined by? The work, the worker, and the workplace, right? There's a
Hmm.
study
Hmm.
done by NASA. And the interaction of three, in my mind, is what creates culture.
Hmm.
Interaction.
Hmm.
Now, of course, if you see, the work is changing, robotics, AI, everything we talk about. The worker is changing. We're talking about millennials, the new generation, the digital natives, everybody coming in. And the workplace has totally changed. I'm working from home, etc. etc. So all the three kind of undergo change. You have to be more nuanced about the culture and what you want to call out. I think all organizations, I'm sure, have seen a shift where well-being and people care is so talked about. Being, we always correlated with doing some physical exercises in office. You would do competitions, fun competitions, who loses the maximum weight or who does the maximum number of stairs. I remember my younger days, these were kind of things that used to happen, right?
Right.
Physical well-being was most talked about. Now you talk to organizations, everything around mental, spiritual well-being, those are conversations that organizations are doing. You have a head of well-being across organizations coming through, right? So this is your way of showing care, and this is your way of shifting a culture a little bit, nudging it to say it is not just about number of hours and productivity. We are talking about work-life integration, right? Used to talk about work life balance. I think it's shifting to work life integration. And therefore, I want to assume, with well being, all this kind of coming into play, your families will start playing a lot bigger role, maybe, It sounds weird as I say it because it's never been, but my assumption is that our families will start playing a lot more active role in our work environment. So whether it is, let's say, mental well-being session, is it me attending it alone or along with a spouse? Because you have pressures from both ends, personal and professional. How do you deal with them, etc.? So maybe long answer, but cutting it short, all your three variables that in my mind make for a culture are changing. And therefore your nuance around the culture needs to be a lot more thought through. And we need to be a lot more intentional about what we are doing. Like I said, being is just one pillar. I'm sure there's lots more that's happening in our spaces right now as we speak.
Right. Yeah, that's very interesting, Smriti. We talk about individuals bringing their whole self, but it's actually now bringing the whole family. If you
Yeah.
think about it, they're
And
all supporting the individual, right?
totally. Who are we without our family? If you look at it, when you say bring your whole self to work, me not thinking about Swasti, my daughter, when I'm at work is not human, right? I am
Right.
a mother. I will be a mother. I will when I'm here thinking she has her exam, how's she doing or dealing with it, right? So I
Hmm.
think if you expect me to bring my whole self, all everything comes along. I'm a package, and I think
Yeah.
that realization is coming in as we speak.
Yeah, yeah. On the same note, Smriti, you spoke about how people used to do all these things around physical well-being earlier. Now coming back to the whole realm of the distributed work mode where people are working remotely. Earlier, having these plaques and posters with these words on the walls and painted and things like that was a big part of communicating your culture and values, and it does play a role. The physical environment does play a role because you know that these are things important for the organization. Now in the distributed world, when my physical environment is probably my bedroom, or in some case, like I was talking to somebody was sitting on top of a tree in a farm while attending a call, right? The physical environment is very different. You're talking about equitable infrastructure, I'm also talking about very different environment. Now in this kind of a setting, how do you then ensure that the organization conveys to people, and when I say people, the whole world, their employees, their customers, their partners, that these are the things that are really important for us?
I think there are both formal and informal ways, right, Harish? I think formal ways have existed always, so have informal. What has gone away in the last 2 years is the informal ways, right?
Right.
I think you and I have spoken about serendipity in the past, and I was actually thinking, what is serendipity in our work context?
Hmm.
And I thought of it that when I'm working, let's say late evening with my manager, and we realize that, let's say I'm slogging and we are making some deck, and my boss suddenly orders, let's say, a Maggie from the canteen, right? That's serendipity. That's by chance. It's his or her way of showing care for me, right? When I'm working on some stuff and I suddenly realize, oh, my sales head must be in the room, I wanted this clarity, I suddenly walk into his room unannounced without any calendar invite and suddenly see him working with my team member on, let's say, talent management, figuring out future potential or future performance. And in my head, there's blurb coming, oh, that's care for people and future thinking. And I make impressions, or to me, that's serendipity. Unannounced, by chance, you just witness something that reaffirmed your faith into the culture or the right messaging that you want to give to people. And sitting with my team member means team spirit and collaboration with HR. It's everything, all those messages, your mind in subconscious, unconscious ways accepting that this is
Right.
what this organization is about.
Hmm.
Even in formal setting, it's not written there. If you enter this room, there's collaboration, you will witness collaboration or this or that, right? It just so happens. However, in today's times, you know that it's just not possible. Meeting your customer just at a shop while he or she is buying a Heartbake or any product of yours is not possible, and you just taking a view. Do you like it? It's not possible anymore. Similarly, entering somebody's team meetings happen, and just entering somewhere and saying, "Hey, how's it going?" Not nobody will entertain because everybody's running from one meeting to another, right? There are no corridors or water coolers, etc., where you just stand by and talk about it. So that bit has totally, in the initial part of the phase, so it totally went away. But I think organizations and people are very intentionally trying around it at this point in time. I think if I talk at organization levels, it is about keeping your meetings not for an hour, but keeping them for 50 minutes. Those 10 minutes you just leave aside, that people say, hey, let's just connect for 10 minutes before my earlier meeting starts, etc. I think bring your own booze kind of informal gatherings happening. You sit with a glass that side, I sit with a glass this side, and we generally chat or coffee chit chats. I know of organizations, Harish, that have taken, let's say, a virtual infrastructure set up within this context, which would mean that you have coffee rooms as you're doing this team meetings, you have coffee rooms or you have, let's say, water coolers, etc. You've set up that layout and you suddenly see somebody entering the coffee room where there is no formality out there that you're entering somebody's space, and you choose to go for a quick coffee yourself as well. So in those 10 minutes or 15 minutes, so organizations are making a lot of attempt to be fair to organizations and to people who are planning for bring your own booze or even delivering dinners, annual kickoffs, etc. Is all about delivering dinners at your team's house and ensuring that you just come together, chat about work, chat about life, chat about family. So there's a lot of attempt being made at ensuring informality at work. I think formal channels continue to work as is. There's no disturbance there.
Yeah. And is there a difference between how a large organization, can and should look at this and how a small organization can and should look at this? When I say can and should, because a smaller organization may probably have a very close-knit group to start with, but may not have the financial muscle probably to do some of these things. A larger team has the financial muscle, but probably teams are already, set into silos, so they don't have that initial strength of the bond to start with. Is there a difference between how teams should look at this? Teams and companies as well.
I think I've always believed, Harish, resources is just an additional benefit. A lot of times, by the time most organizations move into H2, the budgets are busted and you go slow on thousand things, right? As HR, I can tell from hiring to training to culture building, whatever you broadly want to do it in H1, because H2, you know where your top line is, where your bottom line is, and there'll be slowing down of cost because the intent is totally moved to how do you want to grow by cutting costs across organizations, no one specific organization, right? So over these years, organizations have taught you, or your work has taught you, that additional resources is just an advantage you have. If you have it, well and good, but you should know how to do it even without having enough in your kitty, right? The same works at your home. When you and I manage our budgets, we know this is the budget for the year. You make the most of that money. I think that's how I look at organizations. As long as you know your end objective, end goal, that are you trying to create A, B, or C, and you as a team are committed to working towards it, I think whether having resources or distributed workforce, you'll always figure out ways and means of doing it. So in my head, you're small, it's easier for you to do it, but you don't have resources. You're big, it's really tough for you to do it. You're global in nature, your scale is much bigger, etc. But you have resources. Trust me, those resources are also never sufficient given your scale and size, right? So everybody has similar P&L problems or cultural issues, etc., that stem in, but it is on the leadership and their vision that truly makes it happen. As long as that vision is consistent, I think companies achieve it.
Yeah. In fact, these days we've actually started coming up with this culture bandwidth. So we ask people, what is your budget? When I say budget, it's actually the time that everyone can give. How much time do you think people can set aside for doing anything related to strengthening your culture? And then, given the time that they have, because there are cases where there are some companies which just have so much of work that it is going to be a stretch to ask them to do something else. Yes, there is a different problem to be solved there,
Correct.
But while that problem is there, you cannot expect employees to leave everything and say that, yeah, we'll get together and do something like this. So that's been a question that we have started asking people: what is your budget? And then I ask budget in terms of time and not money, right?
Makes sense actually. And I think by asking that question, Harish, you're also making people conscious. You
Yes,
want the star and the moons and whatever, but you don't have the bandwidth or
correct.
your own, you yourself isn't available to make it happen, then what are we talking?
True. So that's a good selection criteria also for us in terms of whether
Yeah.
this is going to go forward or not, right?
Correct, because impact will never come across, right? If
Correct.
you're not invested, the impact will never happen. So
Yeah.
you can spend little or more, but if you're not invested personally, or your leadership is not invested, or people will not have the time because their bandwidth will not allow, then you can put in a lot of effort, but the outcome will never be achieved.
Yeah, yeah. So on that note, Smriti, one thing that we have seen is there are some organizations which are very good at identifying and have articulated their values, and they've created a culture manifesto and doing a great job of it. When it comes to startups or these small and medium scale enterprises, right? They're usually in existential issues. They're fighting very basic problems. It's like roti kapda makan kind of problems that they're fighting. So asking them to do this is always a challenge, is how people tell themselves. That's the story that they themselves. In fact, I recorded an interview with somebody, it should come out very soon. So it's a unicorn company, and it was a very interesting thing that he told me, that he said when he and his co-founder, they got together, even before they decided what product they would be launching, they would be working on, they decided what kind of a company they want to build, what should be the way that they run this company. But he said it, that insight has also come because this is, I think, his fifth or sixth startup that he's working on. He said, had I done this earlier, I don't think I would have had that insight. So it's always a tricky thing about telling startups that no, you're growing, but you need to get your culture right. And वो culture vulture बाद में देख लेंगे. Let me first get my first 10 customers. So do you think there is some kind of a thumb rule that people can follow, that around 50 people, after that you have to make sure that my culture and values have been articulated well, and I'm hiring for the right fit and not just for skills and all those things?
I think more than anything else, Harish, to me, this is existential.
Right.
Honestly, maybe
Correct.
I'm an HR practitioner, so it comes naturally to me. I don't know. But I find it a little odd
Hmm.
when people, there are, let's say in my house, there are four of us living. If we don't connect well, it's not a happy household, right? If the way we think or our thought process, to the extent I'm saying three of us are like real related by blood or family, fourth is my help. Even if she doesn't understand what we as a family want in terms of happiness, right? I don't think she will ever deliver. So I'm just correlating it to personal space
Right.
where you still forget the pandemic, but you spend lesser time than you spend at work. Forget, remember the
Hmm.
pre-pandemic era, about the real your awake hours. You used to spend most of your awake hours. You used to spend at office, right? And if that environment is not clear in terms of what it wants out of its people or what it is working towards, or if it is your problem, it's my problem, if that culture or that nuance or these things are not called out in the beginning and people are run, you figure it out now, you speak to him now. A
Hmm.
lot of
Hmm.
people I've seen will forget, small companies, even large companies can have that kind of working relationship that you make it happen, you're a leader yourself. It's not about, I will come to you after I've exploited all my choices. It's not that my first attempt is chalo boss ke paas chalte hain and let me call it out. I will always come to you after I've figured out that there is a problem and which I'm not able to resolve. So you would always expect your organization, what is the role of hierarchy or your bosses? It's to make it easy for you. There's nothing else they're supposed to do. Technically, working is my job. I'm making it sound very easy,
Hmm.
but technically, at every additional level, the job should be to make it easier for the one below you, right?
Right.
And how do you make it easy? If you've clearly called out your culture, you what you want, what is acceptable, what is negotiable, what is non-negotiable. But if organizations are thinking that existential questions are revenue and PN. अगर बचेंगे ही नहीं तो होगा कैसे? अगर
Right.
PNB नहीं. My question is the reverse. अगर एक साथ होगे ही नहीं तो कभी भी नहीं होगा. I see it very differently in my head. And I think that's our role, to continue to push and nudge the system to say maybe you're not seeing it in the right order.
Yeah, yeah. If you were to get a bit more prescriptive and talk about what are, say, the top three things that these founders and entrepreneurs or owners of smaller scale companies which are less than, say, 1-2 years old, they're still trying to figure out what they want to do. If you were to be prescriptive about this aspect of it, like what is the kind of organization that you're going to build which is going to endure? If you have to think about that, what are three things that you would recommend these people to be doing?
I would say a lot of my friends, and I'm going back to my life and conversations, some of my friends who felt really, who've left, let's say, startups really early. They joined with all enthusiasm and then didn't last long, because I've seen them really succeed well in other organizations. But here, the question they asked themselves was that, how much am I ready to take? There are compromises. So, for example, if you and I are in a board meeting and the culture of the meeting is very homely, we are used to a professionalism with family like culture, but not family in the culture. So, I think setting your professional boundaries, that's the starting point for me, right? And the Bhabiji culture or kya karna hai, isko kaise make around. I think having that professionalism to start with, that there's a management and management takes decisions and all that, I think becomes the starting point for me. Because otherwise, if you're really trying to attract some of the future talent or future leaders, it's going to be a challenge. Everybody wants to work in a professional environment, right? To me, that's first. How do you set that professional environment becomes the second bit, which is the culture that you and I were talking about, right? I think one is the culture comes from the vision of the entrepreneur, which means if my North Star, for example, is to create travel easy and whatever, I'm just taking one industry, but
Right.
it's to do something, right? If you're clear about that, it leads to a lot of whys. I think how deep you dive on it to say, why do I want to do it? You first have to introspect it for yourself. What are you trying to do and why of it? You ask your five whys, you exactly know what is your inner calling or what landed you in this position, etc. Once there's clarity on that, a lot of people tell me that they want to do HR because they think they are good in holding relationships. And I'm like, okay, go deeper, please, because every role that you think as of today needs relationships and networking. I don't know how HR is different in that context, right? So similarly, that entrepreneur needs to dive deeper, whether they need help on this because they've never done it before or they do it on their own, but diving deeper on their true inspiration, on their what that aha moment would look like to them when they reach there, what will really satisfy them. It's of course profitability is one of the things, but there's a lot more beyond that, right? You want to create something where you want to leave behind a legacy. What is that something? What will it lead to? Those questions, if answered well, actually define the culture. I want to do it because my end customer, ta ta ta. That means customer orientation is really heavy on your mind, right? And that becomes one of your values. For somebody else, it maybe it's about providing jobs to people. India is struggling. Maybe that's the moment your employee first becomes your value, right? So it depends upon where, in my mind, it depends upon where are you coming from, because it's your vision that you want everybody to follow through. If you're not clear about your vision and how you want to set it up or achieve it, I think people do understand that you yourself is confused. And that's when in certain organizations you will see really high levels of attrition. The early startups I'm talking about, right? You will see, because the moment you enter, you can sense confusion. You can sense confusion a lot of times in interviews as well, right? What
Right.
you want, like you said, what you want versus what are you ready to give in return? Are you ready to give clarity in return? Are you ready to give your time in? I want a very focused HR team. You have time for HR or you're running after PNL, right? So I think those are some bits that entrepreneurs need to answer for themselves before they start thinking of either drawing a P&L or drawing cultural attributes for their organization.
Yeah, yeah, nice. That's interesting and fascinating as well, Smriti. I'll go to the other end now. So you are in your current role, you are heading global talent acquisition for Reckitt. So how does in your role managing that inner compass of people and organization, how does that play out when you are talking about so many different cultures, people, maybe political diversity as well? There's so many factors at play. So how do you ensure that the organization's inner compass stays true and people are aligning to it in a very natural way, not a forced alignment to that compass?
I think, Harish, it starts with, like I said, in case of entrepreneurs, I put the onus on entrepreneur. I think in professional context, the onus starts with the manager, whether it's
Right.
my manager to me or me to my team, right? So when you talk about talent acquisition as a team, we are undergoing some bit of transformation and there's a lot of work happening in that space. Now, if I don't know what that end outcome of TA transformation should be or lead to, I don't think I'll be able to communicate it well, or I'll be able to help the team see it in action at my end because I myself am confused, right? So I think, like it is for entrepreneurs, the same way for any formal team coming together, it is equally important. Having a good understanding of your leadership values and ensuring the balance with outcome. My leadership value is around care, own, etc. But my work outcome is that within 6 months I have to deliver so and so thing, right? Now, if you see that generally you will be faced with a lot of confusion at a lot of times.
Hmm.
I want to care for my people, but I want the outcome. I think in most cases, what you try answering for yourself is, how do I want to be treated? And I will not lie, it's really difficult. When part of corporates for 16, 17 years, you start running at a particular pace, your outcome expectation is at a particular pace, and then to orient yourself as per, like, we are into 7 regions, right? So Europe, North America, ASEAN, AME, South Asia, China, all operate very differently. The work
Correct.
ethics and standards and ways of work, everything, and that's what geographical
Hmm.
diversity is about, right? To be a first attempt you make is first accept that there's going to be diversity. I think it's
Right.
a tough thing to act. I think we do talk about diversity of ideas, thoughts, gender, what is evident, right? So, but to truly accept this level of diversity, it takes a lot of conversation with yourself. I know that there are evenings I've spent just thinking what I need to do differently, right? And it's just been 2 months in the role. But I think if you are able to gauge that bit, it is great for all of us to accept that diversity is not just about how man and woman look different or how LGBT look different or disabilities are evident, right? It is not the physical difference. It is actually diversity of mind, right? Of
Hmm.
thought. I think you have, it's an internal process more than anything else. Once you start internalizing it, I think in meetings, it becomes much easier. So when somebody from an ex country tells me next 1 month it's summertime and I'm going to be on leave, sorry, it's like India made 2 months leave and then you're back, right? But when you hear it for the first time, it is little difficult. But if you're more prepared, you tell yourself that there has to be empathy. You tell yourself we are distributed not just by geography, but by thought process and how we've all kind of had our lives so far. I think that respect starts coming in. And with that respect, you start telling yourself that yes, I'm changing, even I'm changing in the process, right? I'm accepting people for who they are. I think it's a huge amount of personal growth that comes along and a lot of respect for true diversity in the truest meaning comes along. And yeah, that's how you try to move forward.
Right. Right.
Answer the question.
Yeah. And
Taking
and
us into quite a few directions.
I have a follow-up question on that, Smriti, and this just struck me while you were saying that, right? So if say there are 6, 7 regions that you are working with. Assume that one region has adopted a business practice which is making things very efficient, and it's become a reason why they are doing so much better than the others. And that business practice is just at odds with the nature of another region, right? The way they do things, like you said, 1 month leave and things like that, right? So then at what point do you try to change these other regions to what a particular region has done things? When do you realize that no, making that change is probably, that region is going to lose its identity by making that kind of a change? Is there, how do you manage such a situation?
I think some things are more natural, Harish, like I said about leaves.
Right.
अगर summer एक ही बार एक ही महीने के लिए आना and you're
Yeah.
here, then
Correct.
you're being funny. People any which way have leaves. They are
Hmm.
allowed to take leaves, right? It's just that they want it in one go because beyond that it doesn't make sense for them or it's not as lucrative as it is.
Hmm.
You need to channelize yourself to say it's different. The geography is different. Their weather dynamics. You try to understand that
Right. Hmm.
and you accept the more work oriented bit that, let's say, you're
Hmm.
launching a policy and we've just done, how I've handled it. We've launched one global policy across, right? I think it is, again, the change is never easy for anybody, right?
Hmm.
Forget
Hmm.
regions, individuals, leaders, for nobody. For me, sitting,
Correct.
it's easier to say we are bringing a new
Hmm.
policy, right? But it's not easy for those. Nobody is excitedly waiting for it. Their life is going on
Right.
without your policy as well, right?
Correct.
So I think for me, it is about I think I've done fairly okay on that front is listening. Okay,
Hmm.
so what are your different?
Hmm.
If one of my teams tells me that you want feedback on, let's say, every candidate, and if my managers feed in that feedback, and even if one word goes here or there, then the candidate can legally sue us because
Hmm.
there's right of information. They can ask for what feedback was set up, and the person can sue us in the court of law, etc.
Hmm.
Really? And in India, we are not used to this, right? What we write, nobody even comes at times asking for it, or
Hmm. Hmm.
what you send is a more, let's say, standardized reply,
Right.
etc. And when you hear this, forget whether legally they sue you or not. This is one example. In other countries, there could be other variations, right? I think you have to respect it. So in my mind, it is a global context with local flavors.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
cannot have one policy, one size fits all. We're talking about personalization and customization at individual level. We're talking about regions, right?
Hmm.
So you
Hmm.
have to be fair in terms of trying to understand where they are coming from. So you listen them more, etc. And then you try to relate their problem statement with a try to come up with the solution. Will this work if we train our managers to write it right, or if in that online tool there's a blurb that comes up that says
Hmm.
do
Hmm.
not do a b c d, don't be personal in your feedback or whatever. Does
Right.
that help? Maybe 50%.
Hmm.
Then you
Hmm.
start thinking more, but that's co-creation of solution once you've understood the problem. But I think for everything, having a global solution in my mind for anything and everything is a little tough. You have to be choosy and you have to make the right choices to
Right.
ensure that all your stakeholders understand and you understand as well.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I think adapting to the given context is extremely important. Not going in with any fixed thoughts or models. It's going to be too risky to do that. Right. Yeah. In the last 1.5 years now, it's almost 2 years since the start of the pandemic. 1.5 years, let's assume that. How have the roles of different functions in HR got affected by the pandemic? What has changed?
What has changed? Everything has changed in terms of ways of working. All our processes had to undergo a change. How do you onboard an employee, right?
Right.
The onboarding used to happen. Employee will enter the office, and from there on, that is everything. And there's a team that's handling that onboarding in a physical context. That's changed. How you hire. There used to be a panel sitting, depending upon
Hmm.
position, etc. And then there's a physical connect because you want to read body language, you want to make remarks, your remark spaces that in terms of learning and development. The real learning is when the icebreaker happens, and then once people are comfortable, then you in that, and all this in physical context where there's proximity, there's ability to see as a trainer, honestly, and you know it more than me, Harish, as a trainer to read people's faces when they need a break and when can you just continue because they're really enjoying it. Now it's even a task to request people to open their videos because in their home space half are comfortable, half aren't. So I think everything technically has changed. It has, in my mind, impacted all sub functions within HR. And it has, what's the right word, brought about some newer sub functions. Like I was saying,
Hmm.
head of well being.
Hmm.
Of course, DNI has always existed, but within well being, what is the new focus, etc. So these are things that are evolving within HR. But in terms of ways of working, in terms of processes, in terms of connecting with your stakeholders, everything has undergone change.
Right. And what is the change, or what are the two or three changes that you wished had happened earlier?
I think the flexibility and the choice.
Hmm.
I would not want my team to feel the pressure of being in office because I'm there.
Right.
I always used to say earlier that as long as work is happening, you do it from here or you do it from elsewhere. That's a choice you make, right? Of course, there are days. I've also said it in the past. There are days when you have those, team meetings, etc. Make yourself available because that's the only time when you connect with the team. But otherwise, but again, to that, there have been times when I have been advised to go slow on such change or shift in culture, right? It hasn't played on my mind earlier. It wouldn't, I hope, play in future. But I think that change that pandemic has brought in, right? You work from anywhere as long as work is happening, there's trust and there is output. We are all good to go, right? That change should have come maybe way earlier. I'm saying some of the most obvious things, Harish. The second, of course, is the digital pace. So I think there used to be so much struggle. I used to feel doing such calls and interviews, etc. Come to the room now, let's talk. That comfort used to be so much
Hmm.
around having a physical connect, but again, I think if somebody, one of my team member is, let's say, in Bangalore and all others are in Gurgaon, why should he or she be left out? So now, to that extent, I'm equally comfortable with the Bangalore team member. Now I'm comfortable with the US and the UK team member. Wherever you are, we are all good. We are a team, right? So I think that change was maybe now that I think of it, very much there in global context, in global roles, but in the vicinity, it was assumed
Hmm.
that you are around, right? I think the third biggest change, which is added to a lot of people's wellness, of course, wellness has both sides to it when we think
Hmm.
of pandemic. But I remember, Harish, I was really, I think, really old time. And one of our CEOs had reached out to the company CEO requesting that I'm a single parent and I want to pick my son from the bus stop every day at 2. So I want to not be available for work 2 to 4, but I'm more than happy to slog out after 8 or 10 or
Hmm.
whatever needs to be done. I'm a senior person, I know what
Hmm.
we do.
Hmm.
But those were different times
Hmm.
and we couldn't. I just have this faded memory as I talk to you. We couldn't accommodate that request. That no, it sends out a wrong message to everybody else. Your team takes it differently. Ta 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 ta. And now I think of it. Do I even have to ask? My calendar shows busy. That's about it. There's no way you can connect me. Even if you want to connect on phone, I was available then. I'm available now. I think we took away in that pressure. At least India, I can vouch for. I don't know
Hmm.
globally if it was similar or different. We took away those small pleasures in
Hmm.
this running after work bit. But who says work can't happen after 6 p.m.? And who says that gentleman was not working after 6 p.m. any which way to make things happen? But I think we couldn't because it doesn't. Log kya kahenge? Society. So that
Hmm.
society wasn't just what is in our personal space used to impact us. I
Hmm.
think even in professional context, there is that certain set of people whose wo kya kahenge becomes important. So I think when I think of that gentleman today, I think he must be in such a happy space that as a single parent to pick up his son Children talk the most when they immediately come from school, right? That 2 o'clock moment, if you don't catch them, how was school? They're in that mood where they want to call it all out. If you don't hold it, then 6 o'clock, even if you meet them, they're like, yeah, it was good. Now they're playing, gaming, zoning out, etc., whatever. So I think I just think of that father who wanted to connect with his son from that 2 to 4, and he couldn't. And now he must be in such a happy space that because it's his life and his decisions, and he's got that liberty for work life integration. I think maybe some of the things that should have happened much earlier.
Right. On that note, Smriti, we've come to the end of this interview, but I'm not going to leave you without a couple of questions here. So I'm going to ask you for your hot take on what do you think is the future relevance of head offices, the physical structure.
Like from a global context, I should answer
Yeah. So
question, or individual, I should answer that question.
what do you think is the future relevance of these whole structure, the head office? Is that concept going to be relevant?
Last 2 years have shown us that no, but I've also seen things change, Harish. I'm really scared. Once this entire pandemic is over, are we going to go back to where we were 2 years back? Because that was easier and people were used to it. What you were used to for last 20 years, are you ready to give in 2 years? I think that's the question. But from my individual context, or let's say, forget me, I think the younger generation that's coming in, I don't, if they have, I don't think it matters.
Okay, and the final one, I think which is very relevant to the two of us. So, what is the future relevance of B school campus hiring?
I think the war for talent is not over yet, Harish.
Right.
And I know that we talk about all kinds of diversity, etc. And in that context, the this set of talent provides enough and more diversity and diversity of thought. I always talk about, I want to talk about, let's say, equity. Whether you come from a small town in India or you are some high shoot from the metros, etc., you all come, get the same level of education, and then you chart out your own paths. So when I think of having somebody as a regional manager for developing markets, or I want somebody from developed markets, having that exposure, at similar exposure, I think makes a difference to the way I hire. So I think at least as I see, I'm actually confused, to be honest, whether you call it B schools or you call it schools. I think education and learning to me now, okay, I'm changing my answer. So to me, education and learning is the key. I know that B schools in India's context will always be, at least for some future years as I see it, will be relevant. But the more I look at it globally, Harish, I don't think this thing about which campus, which year is so much fashionable there or so much talked about there. I think it is about your learning ability, your agility, your ability to learn, the pace at which you learn, where have you reached, what are you delivering. I think those are bigger questions to answer than what your which education you got 20 years back. I think some of us or all of us hold it very close even till date. Oh, I have gone to so campus, I'm a 04 badge. I think that relevance in India may continue for more time, but as barriers go away and geographical barriers go away, I think it'll become more and more irrelevant.
So, a subtext to that, Smriti, is do you see the process of hiring from these colleges also changing?
Yeah, because we ourselves work on such things in terms of how to change the process. And by process, your clear understanding of what are you looking for, because there are a lot of future skills that we are talking about.
Right.
Our focus so far as organizations have been primarily on potential, performance, and defined a little more loosely, right? I think organizations will try to tighten it because the future, technically, where we sit today, seems different. So, what was relevant yesterday as a competence or a skill may not be relevant tomorrow. Nobody asked me if I'm digitally comfortable or not, but organizations will design some automation tools or gamification, etc., to just see whether your comfort with respect to changing technology, right? And technology, if we where we sit today, should change every 2 years, right? Something new and flashy will come every 2 years to make our lives more comfortable. And this is where we need less technology. In lot many more roles, there is much more greater need of it. So I think it will, the definition of competencies or what you're looking for will change, which automatically changes the process, because how do you gauge those competencies? That should change along with it.
On that note, Smriti, thanks a lot for this 1 hour long chat on a whole range of topics under culture and future relevance. I think we covered quite a few topics. There are quite a few topics that I wanted to talk to you about which we have not covered. We'll probably leave that for part two of this, and we'll definitely do that sometime in the future. But thanks a lot for chat.
It's always lovely connecting, because it also brings forward your own thoughts, which you don't intentionally think about. But as you speak, as you talk, I think you're also diving deeper into your own self in terms of what are my beliefs and how should it be, etc., etc. So thank you for this. I really enjoyed the conversation.